everyone, welcome back to the ZachGP channel, and in today's episode I have another post FP2 video for F1 Fantasy. So what is the gist of this video that we're going to be getting into? Well, I'm going to be giving you hard and fast information, the most up-to-date information to help you with building the best teams possible for F1 Fantasy heading into the Singapore Grand Prix 2025. Now, to my left you will see a slideshow going across every time you see my face on screen that shows, credit to F1 Fantasy Tools, all of the budget increases needed from every A tier driver constructor and B tier driver constructor that is possible. So take for instance, right now we can see Racing Bulls. It's just gone over to Verstappen. He needs 12 points, etc. It's very good to build around your teams, especially if you're still looking into budgeting. However, also, it is always important just to have a few budget builders in your team, just to make sure that you aren't going down too much in value. So without any more shenanigans, let's get straight into Zach's do's and don't list for the Singapore Grand Prix. And now remember, if I do not mention a constructor or driver in these lists, that means do not bring them into your team. So straight off with the A tier drivers, and you might think I'm a little bit bonkers with who I'm going to talk with first, but it has to be Oscar Piastri. We've seen in FP1 and FP2, McLaren are back. Singapore should be a much easier track for McLaren to dominate a little bit more on. I expect this more to be like Zandvoort over there. However, you can't look away from his budget. So yes, Piastri is a great option for that consistent, doesn't cost a lot of money A tier driver compared to the likes of Norris and Verstappen, to be used as a two-time. Now, the other great option, of course, would be Max Verstappen. That floor upgrade seems to be helping even still in Singapore from what we've seen in FP2. I'm not as confident as I was in him in the past to be the top driver as the two times. However, he still is a very good option for budget increasing and especially to partner up alongside someone like Piastri, or if you want to go for the differential and use him by himself. Now, the big differential in these three selections would be Lando Norris. Again, I just have more faith in Oscar Piastri, more consistent, championship leader, and costs less. Verstappen, back-to-back last race wins. That's why I have more faith in those two. However, if you want a differential and you've got less budget, you might want to go for someone like Lando Norris. Now, a big question we have to ask ourselves, though, is if we can't afford to have any of those Norris, Piastri and Verstappen mixing about team, who do we bring in to pair a Piastri or a Verstappen if we have a 4A build? Well, from the looks of things, George Russell is hard to understand if he will be strong at Singapore because he just hasn't shown us anything because of that crash. However, we can see throughout the season so far that he hasn't really put a foot wrong, getting a lot of top 5 results, still giving us results even when Mercedes aren't at their best. So I'm still confident in George Russell being that driver we can go to. I just haven't seen enough from the Ferrari duo to still be going, oh, I'd prefer them over Russell as well, considering their budget looks worse. So I think for now it still is George Russell as that best, bar the Piastri, Verstappen, Norris trio. But it really isn't a good pool to be picking from right now after FP2. And now heading into the A tier constructors, there is one clear option we should all be using out of these big dogs, and that is McLaren as per usual. Piastri, Norris and Verstappen, like I've been spouting on about this entire video, of course Verstappen not with McLaren, have looked like the only three drivers that we can very much clearly see have a lot of pace around this track. So for me, McLaren, they're the easiest constructor to bring in. Everyone needs to have them in their team. Then on the A tier constructor side, where the hell do we go from here? Now, I still favour Mercedes over anyone else, purely for the fact that you can move your team around quite a bit with the budget opened up from Mercedes as a constructor. And that's really the only reason, because at the minute, we're not seeing anything from Mercedes, no soft running, so we have no idea what they're going to be like. So this is really the only thing we can go of as to why I still like Mercedes. Now looking into Ferrari, they just look too expensive for what they're giving. Again, they haven't really shown us anything, and they have done soft running, so I'm a little bit worried about having Ferrari in my team. They do look like the most consistent out of Ferrari, Red Bull and Mercedes, purely because they both were in the top 10 at least. And then you have Red Bull. As per usual, the differential once again, purely for the fact that Verstappen, if he wins, it will mean Red Bull is the best team to use. However, if he doesn't win and if he comes second or even third, Yuki Tsunoda hasn't looked amazing this entire time so far, and I think he'll let the side down. It could be Mercedes, could be Ferrari, could be Red Bull. It's very much now going to come down to FP3. It's going to come down to what teams you want to run in COTA and what teams you've already been running, as you might not have a free transfer to move them around. Then heading into B tier drivers, and we'll start off with the budget list. So this is the list of all of the drivers that you should be using in your team if you're 100% just going for budgets and you don't really care about the points too much. However, some of these drivers will be in the points list as well. But that would be Carlos Sainz, Liam Lawson, Gabriel Bortoleto, Pierre Gasly, Isaac Hadjar and Franco Colapinto. Gasly and Colapinto for their price floor holding assets. Sainz and Lawson, they need negative points to go up 0.6 million. And then you have the likes of Bortoleto and Hadjar who look good on points and they still look good on budget as well. Now, B tier driver wise on the points side of things, from what we've seen, especially in FP2, would be Carlos Sainz 100% looks so good for points this weekend if he continues this trend. It looks like he's a completely different man in this Williams now after that podium. And then also Fernando Alonso, we know that Aston Martin can be good around tracks like this. He looks good for points. However, he very much is just a points option for the differential, as his budget increases isn't going to happen. Then the final great points option from the practice sessions has to be Isaac Hadjar, only a 10th and a half off Piastri's time at the end of practice 2. Now, don't want to get too excited, but those sorts of timings are very, very exciting. So it looks like if you can bring Hadjar in, right now he's looking like a phenomenal option to be using. Then finally heading into the B tier constructors, genuinely could be usable this weekend is either Aston Martin, if you want a more consistent bunch at the minute, who came 4th and 5th in practice 2. They look pretty exciting right now, and they don't need too much to go up that 0.6 million, so it looks good over at Aston Martin. And then you also have the potential of Racing Bulls. If Lawson just doesn't crash, if Lawson can pull his weight like Hadjar's doing right now, they also look like a very good option to be using. But right now, I think Aston Martin takes the edge over Racing Bulls just for now. Now, quickly, before we head into the team selections, I need to talk about some chips as well. So, of course, if you still have Limitless, it might be worth using it this race weekend. However, we've got to the point where COTA is up next, so potentially if you still have it now and you're not using extra DRS in COTA, Limitless could be a play there as well. So keep an open mind for that. And then Wildcard's really the only other option out there for you right now, because you could use Wildcard to get ready for a bigger chip in COTA when it's a sprint race weekend. And then realistically, final fixing at Singapore, unless we get something like Baku where a Verstappen or a Russell's on pole and the McLarens just aren't there because it's hard to overtake around Singapore, that's the only reason I would tend to final fix over. However, chips wise, stuff like autopilot, extra DRS you don't want to be using right now. So with that all said and done, let's now head over to your team selections for the Singapore Grand Prix. Now we'll start off with the general teams you could be looking at. Basically, these are for the smaller budget teams that everyone owns, and it basically consists of Piastri, who would be your 2 times, with Sainz, looks good for budget and for points. Lawson, he did have a crash, however he still looks great for your budget. With Bortoleto, the same, looking good for budget. With Hadjar, looks good for points and potential budget with McLaren and Ferrari, who right now look like a half decent option as the 2 A-tier constructors, especially as we just don't know enough of what Mercedes is going to bring to the table now after FP2. Now, from this team value of 117 million, if you have a little bit more, as it still looks like it's a big toss-up between Piastri, Norris and Verstappen for who could actually come out and surprise us, then you could go Piastri over to Verstappen for 118.6 million, or Verstappen over to Norris for 121 million. So there's 2 ways you want to go around it. Do you want to focus on your 2 times driver, or focusing on getting the most points from your B tier drivers? And now, if you can't afford 117 million with this general team, that is when you would first focus on your B tier drivers, where you would decrease Hadjar down to the likes of Pierre Gasly, and then you would then go Bortoleto down to Colapinto, keeping Sainz and Lawson for those budget increases, and these teams would cost you 114.6 million and 113.2. Again, if you still need more money, this is where you would then focus on dropping Ferrari to Mercedes, and then if you need even more than that for anyone who's just starting out the game, potentially also look at Aston Martin there as well. Now, heading into a true 4A build, you're now looking at the likes of triple McLaren with Mercedes. Now, for me, there are 2 options with the 4A builds, and I will talk about both of them. However, realistically, it comes to, are you using extra DRS in Kota, or at least planning to? Now, for this first true 4A build, what you would do is instantly, if you couldn't afford Lando Norris, you go down to Max Verstappen. Then you would go Bortoleto to Gasly for 133.2, and then Lawson to Colapinto for 131.8. I trust these teams quite a bit because at the end of the day, these three driver assets of Piastri, Verstappen, Norris look like the only true drivers that we can really trust on knowing that they're going to be at the front this weekend after seeing what Mercedes and Ferrari have been showing us in FP1 and FP2. And the same goes for McLaren. So that's why in these teams, these are very important. And that's why also I enjoy these teams a lot more than the Piastri, McLaren, Ferrari teams for the 4A build. Just because you know you're definitely getting the best of the best out of it. And Mercedes and Ferrari could be anywhere for all we know at the minute. And then the Piastri, McLaren, Ferrari route basically just changes over Norris or Verstappen, whoever you chose, over to Russell, and Mercedes over to Ferrari for 132.8. And again, you can then do the exact same thing we've been doing the entire video with these B tier drivers, dropping Lawson and Bortoleto down to Colapinto and Gasly if you need a little bit more money to go around. And then finally, team selection wise, here is the differential team this weekend. So like I mentioned, it consists of triple McLaren, who look like realistically the only team we can rely on being right at the front this weekend. So I like having both the McLarens and McLaren as a constructor. Then with Aston Martin as the second constructor, as this option to try to go for a differential potentially if Alonso's pace, what they've been showing, is true. Again, with the same sort of B tier drivers we've been talking about before, like Sainz and Bortoleto, but this time round, if you're looking more for the points and a differential, someone like a Hadjar who looks good on budget and points. And if you want to go a little bit crazier and really try to bring in some points over budget, then you could also look into Fernando Alonso. However, this really is a Hail Mary trying to get those points into your team, as many as possible if you need it and your budget isn't really there and you want to improve the rank any means possible. And that is all she wrote for this post FP2 F1 Fantasy video. Now it actually feels like a very weird F1 Fantasy video I'm making right now, purely for how many unknowns there still are, especially on that second constructor. I feel like we can build our teams very easily around that, but it's just that second constructor. Who do we bring in? Aston Martin, Mercedes when they do soft runs. FP3 is going to be very important, and we know qualifying is very important around Singapore, so we have to bring in the best second constructor as possible. Do we potentially look at Red Bull if Verstappen can perform? It's going to be a lot of questions that get answered in FP3, so if you need any more help, make sure to join my live stream over on FanAmp an hour before the deadline, and I will be helping you with all of your questions down below in the comments if you have any that you need for your team selections. So thank you all so much for watching this video. Make sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video today, and I'll see you all very soon. Take care, everyone.